Over the next several videos, we're going to talk about Unreal Kismet. Kismet is a visual scripting system. Now what that means is that it's a scripting system that allows artists, or non-coding kinds of people, to create scripted behavior in their levels in a quick, intuitive, and easy manner. Now you can take a look at Kismet at any time in your level, but what I want to do first is jump into this level that I've set up, kind of show you what's going on so you get an idea of the kind of things Kismet is doing here in this particular level. Then we'll open up and take a look at this level's Kismet, and then as we move through progressive videos, I'll show you how to actually set this up yourself. So here we are. I'm going to go ahead and just jump in, start playing this level. Now, this first part you might have actually seen, but this is using Kismet too. We have a door that slides open. It's pretty easy to set up. Now over here next to the door, we have a light switch. So if we take a look up here, we have a light that activates and deactivates, and it has its own sound effect. Up here on top of the stairs, we have another switch that's red instead of blue. And if we hit this, we get a message. This is not a light switch, please don't touch it. Hit it again. It says, no, seriously, this will not turn on the lights. You want the blue switch next to the door. See it? Yeah, of course I see it, but I still want to push this button. So it says, is it really so hard to just leave this switch alone? And then finally, if you hit it one more time, okay, have it your way, but don't say we didn't warn you.
10, 9, 8, 7.
Try to run out the door,
6, 5,
but it won't open.
4, 3, 2, 1.
And we blow up. So that's a pretty simple Kismet sequence, but let's just take a look at it. Now you can get to Unreal Kismet by clicking on the Open Unreal Kismet button located here in the main toolbar, or as an alternative, if it's easier for you, you can go under View and choose Unreal Kismet. So here we are inside the Kismet editor, and what you're going to see are a series of nodes called sequence objects, and several wires that connect them all together. Now, for simplicity's sake, let's pick on something that's fairly straightforward, like our door. Actually, you know what? Let's take a look at the light switch. I changed my mind. The light switch is even easier. Now, when you're working in Kismet, there are just a few different types of sequence objects that you're going to be using. There are events, actions, and variables. Now, those are your big ones. There's other things too. There are comparisons which allow you to measure up a value against another value, but your big ones are going to be events, actions, and variables, at least for the purposes of this lecture. Now, what we see here is an event. This event is represented as the node you see here. Now, what is this event? It is trigger_0 used. What this is doing is it's listening out for the player, or anybody really, to make use of this trigger in some way, to go up and actually hit the E key and engage the trigger. As soon as that happens, you see several wires that are leading out of the node, and they're coming out of what is called an output that is labeled used. So as soon as somebody uses that trigger, some things are going to happen. And what do we have? Well, we have a little tiny arrow here which leads out to a play sound sequence object, which is playing our lighting sound effect. We have another one here in the middle, which is toggling a light bulb on, and you can actually see that light bulb here stored inside of a variable. So take a look at this toggle action for just a moment. We have an input feeding into toggle, which means firing it once will turn a light on, firing it a second time will turn the light back off. At the bottom, we have several other inputs. We have a target, which basically tells this toggle action, to whom should you be talking? Who are you sending a signal to? If you're toggling something, what is it you're toggling? And in this case, we are toggling point light toggleable 0. Now also, we have a material switch. This is just like a switch box. It's very, very simple. And what we're doing is we're switching between two settings for a material. We're setting a material to an on state, which makes the fluorescent tube look like it's glowing. And then we're switching to an off state, which makes the fluorescent tube appear to be off. Now if we select the switch, among its properties, you'll notice that looping is set to active. So if we hit this 3 times, the first time it turns the light on, the second time it turns the light back off, the third time it's going to loop back around, and it's going to switch the light back on. So it's just going to be a constant on-off each time the player uses this trigger. You see how this works? It's very, very straightforward. It's very easy once you get into it. But if you're not quite in tune with dropping down these nodes and connecting wires and kind of getting an idea of the general flow of information from one node to the next, it can be a little bit tricky at first. So we're going to start off slow just by building this very simple light switch and kind of get you in the mindset you need to be here. And then we'll move on to the destruction switch, which has all the little messages that it plays to the player. It then locks the door, so the door actually quits working when the alarm goes off. And then we've got a separate section here, which does our little 10-second countdown, after which we get an explosion sound, we blow up the player, and then we reset everything. Basically, we unlock the door and we stop the alarm in case they start back up. Overall, this is a very, very simple sequence. If you open up certain levels from actual professional Unreal games, such as Gears of War or Unreal Tournament 3, you can find Kismet sequences that are vast. As a matter of fact, you can actually define sequences, define scripts that create your very own kind of game. You can basically write games right here inside of Kismet, which is something that we're going to take a look at in an upcoming video where we're going to build a top-down game, an entirely different way to actually play Unreal all through Kismet. So all kinds of things you can do. But here, just for our introduction, we're going to start fairly simple. So go ahead and get ready, because we're going to take a look at scripting up our levels. That is going to wrap things up for this video. Thanks a lot. Alright, it's time to put together our Kismet demonstration, and we're going to be taking this a piece at a time, starting with our door. Now the door setup I'm going to use is very similar, though just a tiny little bit different, than the door setup that was created in our simple level demonstration. So if you already saw that and you already have something similar set up on your end, and you'd like to skip this video, then you're more than welcome. However, if you don't have it, here's what we've got. We've got a gate which is waiting to be slid off to the side when the player approaches it. That's really all we're going for. But let's talk about the gate itself. First off, this is not a static mesh. If we right-click and find it in the content browser, this is the static mesh SHU Deco SM Chainlink 02B. So technically, the object itself is a static mesh, but it was not added to the level as one. We did not just drag and drop this out of the content browser. What I did is I right-clicked here on the floor, chose Add Actor, and went all the way up to Interp Actor. That means this is a dynamic object which is ready to interpolate in some way. In our particular case, it's going to move. So make sure you choose that. Now, once you do that, you'll get a gate very similar to what I have here, but it'll have one unique problem in that by default it will not block the player. Player can run right through it as if it were a hologram or if it didn't exist at all. To fix that, you need to select the object you bring in, whatever your interp actor is, press F4 to open up its properties, then expand collision, and set your collision type to collide block all. Because by default it's going to be at no collision, which means your gate will be useless. So we'll leave that at block all. I'm going to close out my properties. Now I'm going to try to keep this fairly Kismet-centric, which is why we didn't take the time to add that here. But I did want to go over and just so you could see any of the pertinent features of the mesh itself. Now, we need an object which is listening out for when the player gets within proximity of the gate. To do this, we're going to use a trigger. In fact, we're going to use a lot of triggers in this level. I'm going to right-click here on the floor, choose Add Actor, and Trigger is always available inside this menu, so just click Add Trigger. We're going to get this guy positioned right in the center of the gate, so right in the middle of the chain link, and then we'll center it up in kind of the left to right of the door as well. Now, I'm going to tap the C key. This actually activates your collisions in your level. You can see all those great collision surfaces. But it also shows you the collision radius of our trigger. Now this is the radius, kind of the volume space within which the player is going to need to be standing in order to activate this trigger, for the trigger to know, hey, you're standing close enough for me to do something. Now to change this, to make it a little bigger, because right now it's kind of small, I'm going to press F4 to open up the properties for the trigger. We'll expand trigger, expand cylinder component, and then expand cylinder component again. And you'll see collision radius currently set to 40, which is a little low. I'm going to crank this up to 128. And just for the fun of it, I'm going to take the collision height and crank it up to 80 just to be kind of careful. Let's close out the trigger properties, and I'll slide this up into the air so that the bottom of that cylinder sets pretty much on the ground. This doesn't really need to be all that exact, though. Okay, so now there's plenty of space for the player to be standing within this volume. Now all we need to do is use Kismet to wire this trigger up to our interp actor to cause the interp actor to move. Now, I'm going to tap C to put our collisions away, and let's open up the Kismet editor. I'm going to do this by clicking the Open Unreal Kismet button, located up here about halfway through the main toolbar. If ever, during these videos, you just see the Kismet editor magically seem to appear like this, it's probably because I really quickly went up and clicked on that button and just didn't think to say it out loud. Generally, I don't do that, but I thought I would warn you. If you ever see this window just kind of pop into existence, don't be alarmed. All I did was click on that button. Now, personally, I think that the Kismet user interface is so simple that you'll probably just get it right away, and anything that you don't understand right off the bat, you'll probably get as you start to use Kismet for a few minutes. But this is a really general overview of the simplistic UI. First off, you have your main sequence area, which is this great big gray window which kind of dominates the editor. There's a menu bar, which allows you to show and hide the properties area down in the lower left, and the sequences area in the lower right. Now, the sequences area right now isn't going to do much for us. We'll actually talk about that just a little bit later. It's right now, it's not going to be particularly useful, but we'll leave it up anyway. Now, next to this, we have a toolbar with just a series of buttons. We have Open Parent Sequence. This is something we'll see a little bit later, but as we create these networks of sequence objects that are all wired together and have all this great stuff that kind of flows around and looks really cool, we can collapse all of that down into a subsequence. It's kind of like closing it into a folder. I don't know if any of you have ever used Photoshop, but Photoshop allows you to take several different layers and put them into a folder called a group, and this is a very similar thing. We can take an entire sequence, a very complex sequence, and essentially crush it down into a single sequence object. So it all kind of becomes like one node, and then we can step down into that node, into that sequence, to make changes. This button allows us to step back up again, and that's something we'll take a look at a little bit later. We can rename any sequence that we like, and that's only for the actual collapsing sequences that we make. So if we take a great big network and collapse it down to a single node, we can rename that node. We have Zoom to Fit. As we start to fill this area up with a whole bunch of nodes, you'll find yourself having to navigate around this window a lot. And so Zoom to Fit will just kind of tuck everything into the window for you. We have Show and Hide our unused connectors. This will become more important when you're wrapping up, really. We can toggle curved connections. Now, I'm going to demonstrate this real quick, just with some junk nodes. So I'm going to go to New Event, and I don't even really care who I grab. We'll just grab Anim Notify, because it's the first one I saw. And I'm going to right-click and grab a new action, and we'll just grab Actor Factory, because it's the first one I saw. And I'm just going to drag a wire out of the output into Enable. Now, this network I just built does nothing, okay? It's just here for the purposes of example. So we have toggle curved connections. If I switch this on and off, we go from a straight line, which you can see here, to a curved line. Wow. So it's just whichever one you like. Now, I think the curved lines look pretty cool. They make me happy, so generally I leave it on curved lines. Now, we can create a new sequence object by clicking the little light bulb button here. Generally, I right-click, and you get a nice sub-menu system, so you know if you want an event or an action or a condition or a variable, and you can choose all of those right here. However, you can also click on the new button. And in this case, you kind of have to know what it is you want to create. So if we want to create an actor factory, which is what I created a second ago, I can type actor and press enter. Now here's all of the different sequence objects which have the word actor inside them. So it's just kind of a way, if you already know what you want to create, to jump in and quickly find it. Now, if you don't know what you want to create, again, this is just personal preference, I find that the right mouse button is a little more useful because you can kind of start off by going, all right, well, I know it's not an event because this is something that is not going to be taking place in the level, and then you can use the submenus to kind of whittle down exactly what it is you're trying to affect. So, for example, if you know that you're going to create some sort of an action that affects sound in your level, well, you can jump right down to the sound submenu and you'll see what's available. So, to me, that can make things a little bit easier. You can search for any of the sequence objects that are already inside Kismet you may have put out by using the search tool. And you can search through the comments, which we'll talk about a little later. You can search through variables, all sorts of different things you can search for. This will become more useful as you start to make very complicated Kismet sequences. Actually, technically speaking, the stuff that we're going to create probably won't really require the search window that much. But as you build something that's really vast, you may find that using this can make it a lot easier to find what it is you need to change. Now, next to this, we have the update list. This is really only going to be useful as newer versions of UDK come out and certain nodes that may be in your sequence become obsolete. Anything that needs to be updated to a newer version will appear in this list. That's really all there is to it. Now, also, just as a side note to anybody watching this video, you may hear me drop the term node as I go through these videos. That's kind of a habit, partially because I'm a Maya person, but also because conceptually, that's what these sequence objects are. They are nodes that are going to get connected together, and each one of these sequence objects kind of has its own functionality. They're like little black boxes that you're going to wire together. It becomes very much like wiring together circuits. Okay, that's enough of a quick introduction to Kismet. Actually the Kismet editor, because now it's finally time for us to start using it. I just wanted to make sure everybody got a little piece of that. Now, let's go ahead and delete out these junk nodes. And we have our open new window button is the last thing. All this is going to do is open another copy of the Kismet window if you want to have multiple ones open. All right, let's go ahead and get started. Now, I already have a trigger here inside our view. Here inside Kismet, I can right-click. And if I have that trigger selected, I can choose New Event using Trigger 0. If you don't have it selected, jump back into your level real quick, select it, and come back in here. Now, let's click Used. This event would be useful if we wanted the player to walk up and actually hit the E key to open the gate. Like, you're kind of suggesting that in the real world, the player would have to go up and slide the gate open. That's not necessarily what we want to do, but if you wanted to set it up that way, you could by creating a use trigger. I'm going to delete this, right-click again, and we'll come down to a simple touch. This is like a proximity trigger. Once the player gets within that collision radius that we set up, then suddenly they're going to be able to see this. This event will take place. I think that's the easiest way to put that. All right, so a couple of things you need to know right off the bat. Every event that you create has a max trigger count. This may very well be the most important property in any event that you build. This, by default, in most events is going to be set to 1, meaning that this trigger, this touch event, will only fire once. Now, if you think about that, what that means is our gate will only open, but it'll never close. And we'll never be able to open it again. So, I mean, really, it's just going to slide open once, and that's the end of it. Now, if that's the kind of behavior you're looking for, cool. Leave it right here at 1. I'm going to set it down to 0, which is the equivalent of setting it to infinity. That means the door can open and then close and then open and close, and it'll just continue that indefinitely. Now, the player has walked into our collision radius, and therefore they have touched something. What are we going to have happen? Well, we need to play an animation. Anytime you're animating an object inside of UDK, you need to be reaching for a matinee. Now, once again, this is a network that was already discussed in our simple level. So what I'm going to do is just kind of set this up fairly quickly. We're going to go from our touched output over to the play of our matinee. And I need to double-click my matinee to set this up. So I'm going to make sure that I select my gate, and then here inside matinee, I'm going to right-click and create a new empty group here inside the group track list. We got to give this guy a name, so let's call it Sliding Gate. And click OK. Now, we've got to give this a motion track or a movement track as well. So let's right-click and choose New Movement Track. And it already comes in with a keyframe, which is excellent because that first keyframe is established at whatever the default position was. So technically, we've already got a keyframe in place, which is setting our gate to this position. I'm going to move my time slider, which is the little black bar down here, over to 1 second, and press Enter. Now, if I click on that key, it says Adjust Key 1. I'll just go ahead and slide the gate to its open position, and now we have animation. So if I hit stop and play, boom, there's our gate. It's opening up. It really is that easy. Now, I'm going to take my overall length of the animation, designated by the little red triangular flag you see over here in the lower right-hand corner of the screen, and I'll pull this back to 1 second. So that's it. That's really all we're going to do. So now let's go ahead and close Matinee. Matinee is not really the focus of this lesson, so I didn't want to spend a lot of time in it. But Matinee is in itself integrated into Kismet. It is a Kismet sequence object. So it's just, in a way, you could think of it as another node or another sequence object that you need to know how to use. So I don't mind really touching on it a bit. Now, when we touch, we're going to play that so that it opens up. Let's set it up so that when we untouch, or when we leave that collision radius, we can click on reverse, which will play the animation backwards. And really, that should open and close the gate. Let's go ahead and give it a quick test. So I'll right-click, choose play from here. We open, we close. We open, we close. Very simple. Now, if we want to do something like some sound effects, this is a little bit outside the scope, but I'll mention it, I'll point it out to you, and if you want to add it in on your own, I'll just kind of show you where to look. If you come under the properties of our gate and expand Interp Actor, here's some things that I'm going to just show you and you can play with. We've got open sound, opened sound, an opening ambient sound, as well as a closed sound, and a closing ambient sound. Try plugging some sound cues in here and see what you get. Now, again, that's more about movers, and there's an entire section of videos specifically on moving objects with Matinee, and we're going to move several different types of objects, and we're going to play with that sort of stuff then. I just thought I'd bring it up. So our very first Kismet sequence is actually set up. All we're doing is opening up a door. That is going to wrap things up for this video, so go ahead and save your level at this point, and then we'll move forward. Alright, at this point you now have a gate that opens and closes by way of Matinee. However, before we get completely away from Matinee, I want to give you a walkthrough of the user interface. Now you might be thinking, wait, we've already used it. You're going to show us the interface now? And the answer is yes. Parts of the interface will be easier to understand now that you've completed a very simple task with Matinee. Now, Matinee itself can be used for things from as simple as just opening this gate to as complex as an entire motion picture, if you like. But we're going to keep things relatively simple. Let's open up Kismet and double-click on our Matinee sequence object. And let's just kind of start off with a general idea of the various areas of the interface. First off, you have a menu bar along the top, and we'll talk more about some of the options within that in a moment. Then we have a toolbar with several of the most common commands and features that you'll be using as you create your own sequences. Now, down from here, you may see the curve editor, and then again you might not. If you don't see the curve editor, if instead your Matinee looks like this, then all you need to do is go to the window menu and show the Unreal Matinee curve editor, and there it is. Now this is like the curve editor of any animation package that you may have potentially used before, such as 3ds Max or Maya. The way animation works inside of Matinee is through keyframes and interpolation curves. You're going to place keyframes along a timeline, and those keyframes will store a time when they occur, and they will store a value. That can be graphed in a two-dimensional axis, and the computer will automatically create a curve that blends between any two keyframes and thereby define the animation, define what happens in between one keyframe and the next. You can edit those curves here. Now, just as a for instance, we've already got our sliding gate. At any point, you can see the curves of an animated object by clicking on this little tiny black box at the end of your track. So if we click on that, we can now see the curve for our sliding gate. Now I'm just rolling the mouse wheel out, but it'd probably be more efficient to start talking about some of the buttons here. So what I'm going to do is click Fit View to All, and now we can actually see that curve. So there's the change in our gate's position over time. Now moving down from here, we have the group track list area. This allows us to see all of the different groups and of course any tracks that have been applied to those groups. As you get deeper into using Matinee, you're going to start filling this up with a lot more tracks, and of course each track is going to carry a lot of different keyframes, though in this case we're just simply using 2. Now down from here we have the timeline, and this is where you're going to drag your time slider around. And you also have a range slider as well that you can use to slide the entire timeline, though generally I find myself just grabbing up here inside the main list where all my keyframes are, and I can slide that around. That of course is just using the left mouse button. Now at the bottom we have the properties area. This will be context sensitive depending on what you have selected. So if you have a movement track, these are the properties that show up. If we grab a group, we get an entirely different set of properties. And all of the different types of tracks you can create will show different properties as well. Now, if you select a group and right-click on it, there are many different types of tracks you could potentially apply, and most of these are pretty specialized, and you can see it just by looking at their names. For instance, we have color property track, which allow you to animate color. We have things like a vector material parameter track, which is good for animating materials. Things like the anim control track, and this is how you're going to animate a skeletal mesh or apply an animation track to it, which is something that we'll take a look at when we start animating cinematic sequences in a later video. So that's a quick look at the general sections. Now let's get just a little bit more specific. Up here in the menu bar, we start off with File, and of particular importance here is the Import option. This will allow you to import camera animation data from a package such as 3ds Max and Maya, so you can animate a camera via a path and import that in if you like. And down from here, we have the Edit menu. Now this has got some stuff that is fairly obvious and some other things that may not be. First off, we have Undo and Redo. We also have delete selected keys and duplicate selected keys. So if you don't want to actually have to create a new key and change its value, you can just select one and duplicate it. We can insert a space at a current location. Now this is most important, like if I had a lot of different keys and I decided that I just needed to plug a few more in and there was no time in between them, I could just slide my time slider to a current location and insert some space. And down from here we have Stretch Section. This actually warrants me stepping away for just a little bit. You'll notice down here in my timeline, I've got some flags. So we've got this little green flag here, which I can drag around, and you'll notice that gives us a nice green selection. And it's got a closing flag as well. We also have the red flags, which allow us to control our overall animation length. If I adjust these green flags, I can use these to single out a specific section of our animation. And here inside the Edit menu, I can stretch that section, I can delete that section, or I can select the keys within it. We have a Reduce Keys option. This will try to simplify your animation by taking out keys which are redundant within a specific threshold. So if two keys are relatively close to each other in value or time, they will be culled. Now, moving down from here, we have Save as Path Building Positions and Jump to Path Building Positions. These are useful with AI. Basically, when your bots are running along their little AI navigation paths, they can run into a door and get confused if the path doesn't go right through. The catch to that is when you lay down navigation points, you've got to build everything. So you got to click the Build Paths button, and if there's a door in between two path nodes, that path can be cut off. So what you can do is set up a position here in Matinee where all of your doors are open, or any particular door you may be looking at, and save that out as a path building position, and then before you build your paths, click Jump to Path Building Positions. That'll open up all your doors and your paths will all go right through. You can also configure some keyboard shortcuts, and this is fairly self-explanatory. You're just going to pick the command you want, and then you can bind a new key to it. Now we have a View menu as well. This has got some interesting options. Draw 3D trajectories will actually show a trajectory in the viewport. Now to really show that, I've got to restore down the Matinee window and kind of slide it out of the way. We've got to close Kismet. And if you take a look, we've got a 3D trajectory here along the top of the gate showing us the motion that the gate will take. That's really all that option's going to do for us. If we were to turn that off, that trajectory goes away. Now let's put our Matinee window back up nice and big. We can choose to show trajectories for all tracks or hide them all. We can decide whether or not snapping is on, and there's a couple of other snap options here as well that won't really be all that important until we get to the toolbar, and I'll discuss them then. We can show the cursor position for all anim keys, just kind of moving down through the options here. We can fit the view to a particular sequence. We can fit the view to the selection with this green selection here, or we can fit the view to a loop. We can also toggle the curve editor from here. Now moving over, our window is really an easy menu. We've got the ability to show and hide the curve editor and the properties panel. Now down from here we have the toolbar. Toolbar has the very first button is something you may find yourself using a lot, though I don't think I ever do. This is the Add Key button. This is how you add a keyframe. Though the Enter key will do the same thing, so I don't think I ever reach up here and click on that. Maybe if maybe you're sipping on coffee with your left hand, so it's easier to click something. Now you can also choose the default type of keyframe that you're going to create. Now I don't expect this to be perfectly clear concept unless you've played with animation curves before, but essentially you can control how the interpolation curve will be created in between each of your keyframes by default. Now, we have some playback controls here. We have the ability to play our animation, loop a section, which means all we do is we designate a selection of the animation using our little green flags here, and we can loop that over and over again, which is great for complicated animations. We have stop, which is pretty obvious. If you click stop twice, it will rewind your animation, and you can play in reverse. So if you want to watch everything backwards, you can. Which can be very helpful if you're trying to time out an animation precisely. Now, moving on from here, you have your playback speeds. These are pretty self-explanatory. You can go all the way down to 1% of your overall speed. You have undo and redo. You have toggle curve editor. You can switch that on and off. We can toggle snapping, and currently we are snapping. So as we try to move, say for instance, these flags, you'll notice they're snapping. If I was to try to move a keyframe around, you'll notice that snaps as well. If I turn this off, we get smooth motion. Now you can change the snapping increment as well. Currently we're snapping to 0.05 seconds, but you have other values as well. Like for instance, we could set to 24 frames a second, 25 frames a second. If you're making an actual video for NTSC, you could set it to 29.97. As soon as you do this, though, you're going to notice some other snaps will appear. So we have the ability to snap time to a specific frame, because now you're dealing with a frame rate if you're doing 29.97 frames per second, where originally you were just dealing specifically with time. So now if you want, you can snap to a specific frame, or you can use a fixed time step playback. This is going to make sure that you are playing back at the rate specified. So for instance, this will make sure that we would be playing back at 29.97 frames per second for NTSC. Now I'm going to set this back to 0.05. We can fit the view to our entire sequence. So if I'm zoomed, say, way out here, and let me make sure that I switch back to 0.5. I scrolled my mouse wheel without having focus. So let's say we're zoomed out really far. We can fit the view to the entire sequence. So now you can see my first keyframe and my last keyframe are at the edges of the screen. We can fit the view to selected, which means I'd have to have something selected. Let me grab this guy and click, and now we're just, boom, right there on that particular keyframe, which we zoomed in really close to that. We can also fit the view to the loop section. So this little green selection I have here, we can zoom right into that at any point. And we can fit the view loop to the sequence, which means if I click this, our green section is going to take up the entire timeline. And there it goes. So that's a quick look at the toolbar. Now moving down from here, we've got the curve editor, which has its own toolbar. We have the ability to fit our view both horizontally and vertically, and this is going to become more apparent if I zoom out, so our curve is really, far away in the distance. We can fit horizontally, which stretches our curve out. Now, this doesn't change the information. You have to keep in mind that what we're doing is we're graphing a value over a specific time. You can zoom in or zoom out in time and not zoom in or zoom out in value. The two can be zoomed independently. So we can fit the view horizontally and vertically, or you can just click View to All. We can also fit to selected, so if we select a single key, we can zoom directly to that. So let's go ahead and just View to All. Now next to this, we have our two different navigation modes. We have Pan mode, which allows us to pan this around very much like an orthogonal viewport over inside the main editor. We can use the mouse wheel to zoom in and out. We also have Zoom mode, and this allows us to zoom vertically using the left mouse, and zoom horizontally using the right mouse. And if you use left and right together, you're zooming both at the same time. Just make sure when you're done that you switch back to pan mode so you can move around if you want to. Now, over from here, we have all of the different tangent types that we can apply to our curve. Currently, if we take a look at the animation for our gate, you'll see that it starts off relatively flat, so the motion is minimal. It starts off as actually none, and then it accelerates, starts to sweep up, and then the curve is going to level back off, which defines it slowing down. We're decelerating before we come to a stop. It's a nice smooth motion where we don't get any kind of jarring stops. Now, if we wanted to show this, I could pull down Matinee just enough so we could see the gate, and if I click play, it may be a little bit hard to notice, so let me actually pull down my playback rate. Let's try 25 and see how that looks. So there you go. We start off slow, and we slow down right at the end. It's a very nice, smooth motion. But we can change that to anything we like by adjusting our tangencies from one point to the next. So by default, we're using curve auto clamped. What that means is that Unreal is actually going to handle the tangency for us, and they're going to be clamped so that we don't get overshoot. Now, what is overshoot? Well, I'll make some overshoot, and then you'll know. So let's grab curve user. This allows us to actually take the tangent handles for the Bezier curves and update them however we want to. So let's do something like this. And that guy that I just picked there, I'm going to flatten him back out to where he was because I don't want him to do that. All I want to do is grab this one curve that's sliding our gate up. And notice I just took the tangent handle and pulled it up a little bit. And because we have Bezier style tangency, our curve now goes way up into the air and then comes back down. So what does this look like when we play back? Well, we're going to go, if we stop, we go way beyond the point of opening, all the way into the wall, and then we come back. If we show this in wireframe, it might be a little bit easier to see. So let's stop and play. So we slide way over, and then we come back. That's overshoot. And having clamped tangent types will prevent things like overshoot from happening. And they can happen automatically. So we'll switch back to curve auto clamped. Now we also just have regular curve auto, which in a case this simple is not really going to be significantly different. If we want to be able to change the tangent types like we did a second ago, we just need to switch over to user. Now, if you have an automatic tangent type and you come over and you change the tangent handle, it will automatically switch over to user for you. So we could have a gate which starts off really slow and then accelerates and slams open. So here's what that would look like. In fact, let's go ahead and go back to a lit mode because it looks cooler. And really slow, and then wham, it opens up. And that would look even cooler at full speed. So I got to do it. I had to show you. You can just hear the bang of it, you know. Okay, so now let's expand that back out. So there's all of our tangent types. We have curve break if you want to use cusp points where your curve would kind of spike, meaning your animation would come to a screeching halt and then maybe change direction. We have the linear type, which would just be a constant rate of motion. And we have constant, which means you get no interpolation. You just stay at one value and suddenly blink to another value. It's really good if you want to animate something like a blinking light. Now, we can flatten the tangents to the axis. So if we click that, notice it just flattened out my tangent. We can also choose to make our tangents parallel or straighten them back out. So this would be if you had broken some tangents, say in the middle of a curve, which I'll do real quick, just to show you how it's done. If we drop a new keyframe in here, which I did just by pressing the Enter key, and we'll do break curve tangents, I can move this guy down and this guy over. And if you're curious, which whether you are or not, I'm going to show you what this would look like. Let's go ahead and hit stop and play. Boom. You see there's a little bit of a hitch in there while we change direction. More obvious if we slow down the animation. And thunk. So it's like it caught something in the track, which is pretty funny. Now, if we wanted to straighten those back out, we could just select the key and straighten out the tangents. But what I'm going to do is actually delete out that key altogether. Okay, now down from here, we can show all of the curved tangents simultaneously if we need to see them all. We can also create curve tabs. Now, this is not really going to be particularly useful until we have a lot of different things animated, but basically this allows you to take your animation curves and put them into groups. As you create tabs, you can add curves into those tabs and then cycle through all of the tabs you've created using this drop-down. And then if you decide you're done with a tab, you can just delete that tab. It won't delete the curve, it'll just delete the organizational system. So that is a pretty general overview of the Matinee user interface. I understand it's a lot of talking, and if you're not the kind of person who really enjoys walking through this, well, congratulations on making it this far in the video. But I do want to mention that really you're not going to get the hang of using Unreal Matinee until you start animating objects with it. So, I encourage you to strike out and find things, start playing with movers, drop in a skeletal mesh and move it around the level. And if you want to know how you can apply animation to a skeletal mesh, take a look at our videos over creating cinematics with Matinee, and you'll see some really cool tricks for doing that. Also remember the different types of tracks you can create. So just remember you can right-click on any group and there's a lot of different things you can play with. There is one more type of track, which I will mention, but I'm not going to go too far into simply because it is covered pretty nicely over in the cinematic section. But if you right-click, you'll notice you can create a director group, which is going to split up your interface pretty dramatically, which is the only reason I'm bringing it up. A director group is kind of a combination between a camera switcher and any kind of motion picture style effects you want to apply. So for instance, you have a director track. This allows you to jump between multiple cameras you may have in your level. And if we right-click on our director group, we can add things like a fade track if we want to fade our animation in and out. We can add a slow-mo track, which allows us to animate changes in playback rate. So if you want to slow everything down, you can do that. We have a master audio track, and we can even scale the color of the overall scene. So a lot of controls that you have at this point. Every matinee that you create can only have a single director group, so keep that in mind, and only a single director track. So that will wrap things up for this video. Thanks a lot. All right, let's set up our next part of the Kismet sequence. Now, what we're going to be doing is building a light switch. It's kind of like a rite of passage when you're learning Kismet. I think everybody kind of makes you learn a light switch for starters. And what we're going to do is toggle an actual light actor to activate a light and deactivate it, turn it on and off. But we're also going to manipulate a material. And I want to talk about that for just a second. What we have here is a static mesh of a fluorescent tube. If I right-click on it and come over to Find in Content Browser, you'll see that this is SLT Light SM Fluorescent 01B. Now, I want to show you how we're going to basically control the material that is on this static mesh. I'm not going to walk you through the actual process of creating it right here on camera, not actually doing it step by step, but I'll give you enough of an overview that you should be able to recreate it on your end. If you double-click this static mesh and step down into its LOD info, you can expand it all the way down and see the material that is applied, which is MLT Light SM Fluorescent 01. You can either search for that in the Content Browser or click on the Find Object in Content Browser button. And here's the material that's applied. Now I'm going to close out the static mesh editor in the background. Here's something cool about that material. If you double click it to open it up in the material editor, you're going to notice that it has a parameter applied to the light bulb's actual color. The cool thing about parameters is that you can access them through a material instance constant and thereby change the color of the light. So all I did, and this is all handled beforehand during the setup process, I created a brand new package. In fact, here, watch this real quick. I'll just create a brand new one real quick. We'll come down and choose New Material Instance Constant, and we can give this any name. We'll just call this Temp because I'm going to delete it anyway. And we get the window popping up back here. It's asking for a parent material. Now, the parent material is going to be that material which was applied to our static mesh. So let me slide this out of the way. We have to find that again, so I'm going to right-click, choose Find in Content Browser for the static mesh. I'll expand the static mesh again and just grab this guy, though it probably would have been faster if I'd copy-pasted that name. So here's the material. With that selected here inside the Content Browser, I'm just going to come back over to my Material Instance Constant, and next to the parent, I'm going to click the little green arrow. So now we're using that as a parent material. Down here at the bottom, you'll see vector parameter values. There's our light color. There's that parameter I just pointed out to you. Check this. Expand its colors, and for now, just switch the light off by setting all these colors to 0, and there you go. You've just created an off version of the light. The cool thing is that this parameter can be talked to within Kismet to set it to any value you want. We could, if we wanted to, set the reds up to 3, and we just made a red fluorescent light. I'm going to close that out. Now, really, all that was done outside of setting that up that was special is you have to apply that to this static mesh, which is really as easy as just dragging it from the Content Browser right on top of that static mesh, which is all that was done here. Now, let me go ahead and delete out that temporary Material Instance Constant. I just wanted to bring that up in case you wanted to set something similar up on your end and maybe didn't have this level open. At least you'll know how to take care of that. However, in this video, all we're going to worry about is actually setting up the light actor. So this is actually going to turn the lights on and off. To do this, we need a very special actor called a point light toggleable. It's just like a regular point light, which you can already see a couple copies of here in the level, but a toggleable, as its name suggests, can be switched on and off. Now to get to these, we need the Actor Classes browser. I'm going to go to View, Browser Windows, and choose Actor Classes. Now if we expand Light, you'll see Point Light, and underneath Point Light, we expand that, and you're going to see Point Light Toggleable. Choose that, close out the Actor Classes browser. I'm going to right-click here on the wall, and choose Add Point Light Toggleable here. We'll slide this out from the wall, kind of keep it right in front of that fluorescent tube. Now I'm going to change a few aspects of this light just for setup purposes. Let's press F4. I'll expand light, expand point light component. Now, let's change the radius down to, say, oh, I don't know, maybe 512. Even that may be a little bit small. Let's try 650. Make sure I have my focus in here. 650, that's pretty good. So we'll go with that. Now I'm also going to change the color. So let's close up point light component, expand light component, expand light color. And we're going to leave this primarily blue. So I'm going to pull green down to, say, I don't know, about 200 just for a test. And then for red, let's try 175. So it's primarily a blue light that's coming out of there. Now, the last thing we need to do is underneath light component, make sure we switch off enabled. That means that by default, this light is going to be, well, not on. It's going to be completely off. We're going to use Kismet to turn it on and off. Now, to do that, this is the trigger that we're going to use. Now, this is not necessarily a trigger in the sense of something that is going to talk to Kismet. This is just a static mesh. It's just here so that the player sees something with which they can interact, because by default, you can't see a trigger. Now, let's add a trigger in that we can kind of hide behind the scenes. I'm just going to right-click, choose Add Actor, and click Add Trigger. Now, me personally, I think that trigger is huge, and it's kind of in my way. I mean, now that might be just fine. Technically speaking, I could still work around that, but if you ever find yourself wanting to shrink one of these down, all you need to do is come down to your Draw Scale fields here at the bottom of the screen in the console bar, take your first field, and by default this is set to 1 or 100% scale. Let's pull this down to like 0.3 and press Enter. At first you will notice no change, which will startle and frighten you, but if you then click on the icon, it will then update, and you can kind of keep that tucked down. So it's just a little bit easier to keep an eye on what's going on, to me, if I shrink this down. Though if you have a hard time seeing it after doing that, you may want to, scale it back up. Just make sure you realize that every time you change this, you're going to have to click on the icon to see an update. All right, I'm going to leave mine fairly small. Now, with this trigger selected, I'm going to immediately jump into Kismet, make sure I click the Open Unreal Kismet button, and let's just slide this little network out of the way. Now, navigating this window, you might have already figured it out. It's so easy. It's just like navigating the orthographic views. Drag with the left mouse button or the right mouse button, and you can move objects around. If you drag with left and right together, you're zooming in and out. Now, I'm going to take what we have already that's opening the door, and I'm going to slide it completely off the screen. It's just gone. Now, I'm going to right-click, choose New Event using Trigger 1, and this will be a used event. That means we actually want the player to walk up and hit the E key, like the character inside the game is going to go up and flick the switch with their finger or something. Now, there's a few settings that we need to be aware of. I already talked about max trigger count. We'll go ahead and leave that set to 1 for just a moment. We'll come back and switch it to 0. Here's another one I'm just going to point out that we're not going to change for the moment. This is Aim to Interact. This means that the player will have to be looking directly at this trigger for our effect to take place. That's going to be a little bit of a pain later on, but again, for now, I'll just leave it. Now, we need some way to toggle our light on and off. This is one of those things where it's probably going to be a good idea for you to take some time and grab your new action list and just take a look at the types of actions available, or start reading about them on UDN, because you have a lot of actions and it can be a little hard to keep track. But in this case, we know we want to toggle something, and there's a toggle submenu. So all we're going to do is grab a basic toggle. Now let's take a look at his inputs for just a moment. We have turn on as an input, turn off, toggle, which will turn on, then off, then on, then off. We have a target object, so this is the object that will be turned on and off. We have a Boolean, and we have an event that we can start or stop using this, or basically activate or deactivate. Now really all we're interested in is the target. So what I'm going to do is take our used output and drag a wire out, and we're going to plug that into toggle. That means the first time we use this switch, we could turn the light on. If we use the switch again, it will just do the inverse. It'll turn it off, and so on and so forth. Now, we just need some way to talk to our light actor. Let me close Kismet for just a moment. Don't worry, it'll save your place, so closing it's no problem at all. I'm going to reach up here and grab our light actor. I'm going to jump back into Kismet, and I'm going to right-click here in Open Space and choose New Variable. A variable is how you're going to pass data into a sequence object. Variables can hold all kinds of stuff. They can hold integer numbers, which is just a counting number. They can hold float values, which are numbers that have decimal places. They can hold Boolean values, true and false. They can hold strings if you have something you want to type out. They can hold vector information, like RGB or X, Y, and Z data, and all sorts of other things as well. There's matinee data variables, which actually contain all of your keyframes for an animation. There are even external variables. There are named variables, which are kind of like radio control variables. We'll talk about those later. There are object variables, which is something we're about to use. And there's even player variables. If you want to do something directly to the player, this is the variable you need to create. If you pass the player variable into a sequence object, you're talking to the player. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to right-click and notice one of the options that pops up because I have a point light toggleable selected is new object var or variable using point light toggleable 0. Click on that, and there we go. So there is an object variable. It already contains our point light toggleable. So now all I have to do is take our little target input, drag a wire right on top, and notice that they're color-coded. We have a magenta input, and an object variable is going to be magenta. Now, just to give you a quick heads up on how that works, if I come into new variable and I choose a Boolean, Booleans are red. If I come back under new variable and choose an integer, and let's just grab a regular integer, you'll notice they're cyan. If I grab a string, for example, strings are green. So this color coding will become more important as you get deeper into stuff. Now, I'll just go ahead and nuke those out. Now, you just saw me create an object variable using whatever happened to be selected and then connect that in. Let me show you a shortcut real quick. If you put your mouse right over the target input and then right-click, you can choose new object var using point light toggleable 0. It comes in and it's already connected. Now I want to talk just for a moment. You just saw me delete out a node. That was done just by selecting the variable and hitting the delete key. It was really that easy, and I can add it back in real quickly. Let's talk about moving these around. As you create more and more complex networks, positioning these sequence objects is going to become critical. You can move these guys around by selecting them, holding down the control key, and dragging like so. And you'll notice those wires stay nice and connected the whole time. So we can position these however we want to. You can also make multiple selections by holding down control, so you can move them all at once. Or if you hold down control and alt together, you can drag out a marquee selection box. So it's just a few of the selection methods to make your life a little easier. So I'll keep these nice and kind of tucked together. This is already a simple Kismet sequence that will turn our light on and off. Let's go ahead and test it out. I'll jump into my level. And here we are. Let's run up and the gate opens. And here's our switch. And it's, okay, there. It just came on. It's kind of subtle. In fact, you're almost expecting that bulb to lighten up, and it's a little weird when it doesn't. But we're having a little bit of a problem because if you notice, and it may be a little hard to actually translate in the video, it's almost hard to know exactly where you should be looking. And that's where I was discussing earlier that this aim to interact is going to become a little bit of a pain for us. So I'm going to switch this off. This means we do not have to be looking directly at the trigger, we just have to be within that trigger's radius. By default, that radius is pretty small, which will be perfect. The player needs to be standing pretty much right on top of the switch. But I'm sure you've gone into rooms and you've just kind of casually, reached over and switched on the light switch while you were looking at something else. By switching off aim to interact, we can do the same thing. We can look up at the light and actually see it switch on and off. So now let's try this again. Actually, before we leave, let's jump back into Kismet. I'm going to select my use trigger again. We're going to grab our max trigger count and set that to 0. So now we can use this trigger as many times as we want. Let's jump back into the level. And you'll notice my lighting needs to be rebuilt. I'll probably take care of that before the next video. So now I can hit the button over and over, and you'll see the light is actually switching on and off. That light is fairly dim. Just for the purposes of example, I'm going to brighten it up. So let's select this guy, expand light, light component. Let's grab its light component, and we'll set brightness up to, 2.5. And then if you want to test it right here, we can just switch enabled on for a moment and see how bright that really is. That's better. We'll go ahead and go with that. So we'll disable it, close the properties window, test out one more time. and boom, there you go. So we've got a light bulb which is switching on and off. Next we need to deal with our material, but I'm going to take care of that in the next video. For now, go ahead and save your level, and if you need to rebuild your lighting, do that too, because I'm going to have mine rebuilt when we get back. So that'll wrap things up for this video. Thanks a lot. All right, we are back, and we are setting up our light. We're now going to focus on updating our material so that our fluorescent tube appears to illuminate. I do want to mention this. In between videos, I did rebuild my lighting, so we won't be getting that error message anymore. Now, also in the previous video, I told you that this static mesh had a new material instance constant applied to it. I showed you generally how that was set up and applied. So now all we need to do is talk to that material instance constant, and we can thereby change the color of the material. So let's start off by grabbing our content browser, and we need to locate that material instance constant. Now it turns out I know exactly what package that's stored in. If for some reason you didn't, an easy way to get there is to double click your static mesh, expand static mesh actor, expand static mesh component, and then jump under rendering. You'll actually see all the materials applied to a particular mesh, and in this case that's our material instance constant. So you can just click find object in content browser, and that'll select it for you. Now, keep that guy selected here inside the content browser, and let's open Unreal Kismet. Now we need a particular action, a very specific action, to control a material instance in our level. I'm going to right click, let's go to new action, and again it's a matter of knowing what it is you're working with. We know we're working with a material instance, and there's a material instance sub menu. Now what we're going to change is a vector parameter. A color parameter has R, G, and B data, all kind of considered to be one number, which is a vector. So choose set vector param. Now there's some things we have to set. First off, we need to plug in the material instance we want to talk to. We've already selected it in the content browser, so let's click use selected object in content browser. And we need to give it a param name. Now if you don't know the param name, you'll need to open up your material instance, which just real quick I'll remind you how to do. If you double click the material instance constant, you'll see vector parameters, and the name is light color. I want to show you another trick too. If we expand this, if you just want to make sure that you've got the correct spelling, because spelling is going to be critical, type it all out in lowercase, because you might have noticed light color had a capital L and a capital C as well. So if we just set this to light color, all lowercase, watch the name when I press enter. You'll see it automatically capitalizes. So that means that Unreal was able to see that we already had a property named light color, and it made the association and changed the casing for us, which is great. Now check this out. If I just grab this and plug it straight into the used output of our trigger, we've already got a connection. The only thing we need to do now is set the color that we want to change the light to. I'm going to expand our vector value here under our set vector params properties. Let's scroll down a little bit. Notice that R, G, and B are backwards here. It's actually B, G, and R. We're going to set red to 1, we'll set green to 2, and we'll set blue to 3. So it'll be primarily blue with a little bit of everybody else in there. And let's go ahead and close out Kismet for just a moment, and let's just give this a quick test. I'm just going to right click, choose play from here. Now, I'm going to look up at the light. When we hit the switch, tap the E key, blam. The light switches on. However, as I continue to toggle, it'll just remain on. So we need some way to switch it off. Now this is where things get a little bit interesting. All this guy is just a regular node. He just sets a single value. What we need is some way to send a signal out from our use. Basically, when the player uses the trigger, we need to have a switch box, which keeps track of the number of switches and jumps between an on state and an off state. That's pretty easy to set up, but it is going to require that we add a new node in here, and so we have to disconnect one of our wires. Disconnecting a wire is easy. All you do is hold down the Alt key and click on either an input or an output, and bink, the wire disappears. Now, I'm going to move this node kind of out of the way. Let's just slide it over here. Now, again, I mentioned that we need a switch to switch between an on state and an off state. Before we create that, let's go ahead and establish our off state. Because right now what we've done is we've created a set vector parameter which changes our material to make it look like it's been switched on. Now let's make another one which will switch it back off for us. So I'm going to select my set vector param sequence object, press Control C and then Control V. It's copy paste, just like many other programs you've probably used, such as word processors. And we'll move this just underneath the original. Now we need to change the vector value here back to black. So select your new sequence object, expand vector value, and I'm going to set R, G, and B to zeros down the board, which sets everything back to black. Okay. Now, I've got my two options. I just need a way to switch between them. Well, how do you switch between something? Let's right-click and go to New Action, and it turns out there's a Switch submenu. There's a few different types here. There's random switches, which will grab a random option. There's delayed switches. We're just going to do a regular switch. So go under Switch and just choose Switch. And there's a few things we have to set up here. First off, we need two separate indices. Two things that we can switch between, an on state and an off state, and by default we only have one. If we come into the properties, you'll see a link count by default set to 1. Go ahead and set this up to 2, and now we get 2 links. Now this is how easy this is. Link 1, we're going to plug into the on state. Link 2, we're going to plug into the off state. So this node is setting the material to on, this one is setting it to off. A couple of other things we need to keep in mind, but actually, you know what? Let me just show you how this works. So let's go from our used output on our trigger into the input of our switch. We're missing something, but I actually want to show you the effect of what happens when you miss it. Let's just play from here. Now this is kind of interesting. Our light is already on. That's an interesting problem. But what I'm going to do is hit the E key once. Now that just set the material to its on state, though it was already on, so that's kind of an interesting problem. And then we can press E again, and that switches the light back off, which is great, but watch what happens if I hit E again. It just turns the light bulb on. The material is no longer updating. Now the reason for that is that if I jump back into Kismet and select the switch, looping is not switched on. You've got to switch on looping. Looping is what tells the switch to go to link 1, then go to link 2, and then if you hit it again, it's not going to see a link 3, so it'll wrap back around to link 1. So we're switching on, then off, then on. So let's give this a quick test. Choose play from here. I'll look up at the light. Oops, switches on, switches off. Switches on, switches off. Technically speaking, our light switch is complete. And for the purposes of just, sending this level out to some of your friends so that they can just open it up and play it whenever they want to, you are done. However, for working in the editor, there's a problem. I'm going to switch the light on and then hit escape to jump out of the play in editor. And then I'll jump right back in. Choose play from here. Notice the light is already on. That's because the last state of the material instance constant was set to on. This is not something you have to worry so much about if you just got a level that you're going to package up and send out to other people with UDK so that they can play it on their end. When they open up your level, the light will be off as long as your material instance constant's default value is set to off, which it is in our case. In the editor, it could be a little confusing and it could get in the way of certain tests if you come in and that thing's already on. So let's take just a moment and we'll set up a separate Kismet sequence whose sole purpose is to switch the light back off. So back here inside our Kismet sequence, I'm going to right click and create a new kind of event. This will be a level loaded event. It's a very useful event. Basically, when the level loads up and you're getting ready to play, you can have any action that you want to take place at the very beginning of the level plugged into this guy. What I'm going to do is grab the set vector parameter whose vector value is currently black. With that selected, I'll press Control C, Control V. We'll move this new copy over here, and when the level is loaded and visible, we're going to set our material instance constant to black. That's all we've just done. It's very quick and easy to set up. We just said at the beginning of the level, turn the material off. So now let's test that out. Choose play from here, and the light's off. I can turn the light on, jump out of the level, jump right back in, the light's still off. So it's just a way to kind of keep everything all at its nice initial state. Now, just one more time, I just want to make sure you understand. When you are building this level, so it's something that you can just kind of package up, send it to people so that they can play it, they will not experience that problem. That's something strictly for the editor. However, we now have our finished light switch, so go ahead and save your level, and then we will move forward from here. Thanks a lot. All right, we have our functioning light switch. However, there is something that I want to address before we jump over to our other switch. Now, that is, if we jump into Kismet right now and take a look at all of our separate nodes. In fact, just real quick, if you want to, you can click on the Zoom to Fit button inside the Kismet toolbar, and that'll show you everybody. We've already got a lot of sequence objects starting to appear, and it's not immediately apparent what each thing is doing. So I want to talk briefly about setting up comments on your sequence objects. Comments can come in two flavors. You can take your individual sequence object nodes and place comments directly on them, or you can have group comments, which can contain any number of nodes that you like. So what we're going to do is actually set up both. First off, let's pick on this little area here where we've got our light switch. What's actually going on in this? First off, the player is using trigger 1 inside the level. Well, let's go ahead and designate that. If we take a look at the properties for this sequence object, down close to, I guess about 3/4 of the way down, you'll see object comment. We can click this and type anything we want in here. Player has used light switch trigger. Bink. And there we go. So now we see a nice little comment telling us what's going on. As we zoom out, you'll notice that gets a little small and it can get hard to read, so keep in mind you got to zoom in to see those. Now, the next thing, we have our switch. What does this switch actually do? Switches between on and off states for material. Actually, let's just say switch between. Now, that's a really long comment, okay? Generally, I don't leave comments that long. I'm only throwing them here just as an example for the sake of the video. So let's pull this down so that things are kind of underneath our comment line. Get everything arranged just so. Now, this vector, set vector param, this is the material on state. Now I'm going to hit Control-C and select that. We'll jump into our second vector param, and I'll paste this into the object comment, and we'll set this to off state. Now our toggle will toggle the point light. And we could put a comment down here on the actual variable, but I don't think we need to do that. So now, just by glancing at this network, you can see everything that's taken place. The player has used the light switch trigger, which has fired off two things. One, it's toggling a point light, and it's going to switch between the on and off states for the material. There's the on state and the off state. The cool thing about it, if we'd done this at the outset, it would have been very easy to know exactly which of these two nodes we needed to select and bring over here to our level loaded. So be sure to use comments. Now, there's another kind of comment as well. You can take any selection of nodes. So for instance, I could hold down Control and Alt and drag a marquee selection box around all of these guys. Then I can right-click and I can choose New Comment, or as a shortcut, I can just press the C key, and that'll bring up the new comment window. So you can type whatever text you want in here. This will be our light switch network. Now check it out. We get a little box that surrounds all these. Now I'm going to position the box just a little bit more strategically, so we can just, with the box selected, you can just click on its name to select it. You can hold down Control and drag that around like any sequence object. And then using the little black triangle in the lower right corner, I can expand it out. Now it has a couple of cool little settings to it. We can tell it whether or not we want it to draw the box. So if really all you want is just some floating words, you can switch off the box. You can control the border width, so we could crank that up to, say, 3 pixels if we want that to be a little bit brighter. We can change the fill color. Now this is kind of cool. Now, the light switch was currently attached to a blue object in our level, so let's make this blue. I'm going to take green and red, and let's just pull those down to 0. So now this whole thing is blue. It also has an alpha value, which controls how transparent it is. By default, that's set to 16, so you have kind of a faint blue. We can crank that up to, say, 64 and have a much darker blue color. And actually, if we're going to do that, let me take the green and push that up to, say, 100 just to get a nice kind of lighter blue color. So there we go. We've got a nice comment which surrounds that. Notice that the name of, or the actual comment that we put on these boxes will resize as we zoom away. So these can be really useful to help you figure out what a large group of nodes is that you're having to view from a distance. And then as you zoom in, you can then see what each individual sequence object is doing with those object comments. So really quickly, let's set up some comments for our other objects as well. I'll hold down Control and Alt. We'll grab our level loaded and our set vector parameter. I'll tap C and we'll call this initial level conditions. Press enter, and I'll just kind of resize everything accordingly. And this one, I'm actually going to take R, G, and B, and we'll set them down to 0. And I'll pull my alpha up to about 32, so it just kind of grays that out. So it's just sort of a darker area. Now, we have our matinee as well, so let's Control, Alt, grab all this. Press C, and this will be door network. I won't worry about the color here, but we'll expand this out, and I'll take my border width and set that to 3. So there we go. We've now commented everything out. It's very easy to see what each group of sequence objects is doing. Please make use of comments. They're not only a good idea for you, but if anybody else is working on your levels and trying to help you out with your Kismet, it'll make their lives a lot easier because they can see what all of your various sequence object nodes are doing. Save your level. That'll wrap things up for this video. Thanks a lot. All right, it's time for us to start on our next example in our Kismet demonstration. Now, this is really going to, in effect, be a practical joke on the player. There's going to be a red switch that they'll go over, and when they use it, a message will pop up on their screen asking them not to use this switch anymore, to please leave it alone. If they continue and keep using the switch, they'll get kind of like nastier and nastier messages until finally the system's going to get frustrated. It's going to lock the door behind them. It'll fire off an alarm. There'll be a 10-second countdown at the end of which the player will explode. So it's very funny, but what we're going to do is put this together one piece at a time. So some of these videos may seem a little bit on the short side as we get just one singular aspect installed. Now let's begin by creating a trigger, something that the player could walk over to our little mesh and use. Once again, if you didn't recognize our mesh, this is just the rocket pack static mesh for ammunition. I'm going to right-click, choose Add Actor, and add a trigger. Now that trigger is big, it's huge, and it's kind of in my way, so I'm going to take its draw scale down here at the bottom of the screen in the console bar, set the first field to 0.3, but then of course make sure you click on the trigger to see that change take place. And we'll slide this over so it's pretty much right in front of our little switch box. Now, with this trigger selected, I'm going to jump right into Kismet. Now, here's all of the Kismet sequences that I have right now. I'm just going to come out here to a blank space here in Kismet. We'll right-click and choose New Event using Trigger 2, and this will be a used event. Now, on your end, that might be Trigger 2, Trigger 3, Trigger anything. There could be several different triggers already in your view, especially if you've been creating and deleting, so don't get too caught up if your number's a little different than mine. Go ahead and switch to used. Now, what do we want to have happen? Well, first off, there's some things we need to set right here. I'm going to switch off aim to interact. It'll be enough that the player is just close enough to proximity. Let's also take max trigger count, and we'll set that to 0. All right, so that's all we're going to do there. Now we need to have something happen. Now, the first thing I want to have happen when the player walks up and uses this trigger is we're going to put a message on their screen, and I would like some sort of an audio cue to help them realize that some sort of message just fired up. It's like when you're using an instant messenger. You know, if somebody's talking to you and you don't have focus, they play a little noise to say, hey, you know, look at your instant messages real quick. We're going to do something fairly similar. So let's right-click, choose New Action, and I'm going to choose Voice Announcements and grab Play Announcement. Now, Play Announcement allows you to designate some text that will pop up on the player's screen, and it allows you to play a sound simultaneously. Let's jump into its properties, expand the announcement category. I'm going to take the announcement sound, and let's actually go dig up the sound we're going to use here. Just a note, though, this does not take a sound cue. This is actually looking for a sound wave data. So I need to close out Kismet for just a moment. Let's go into the content browser. Now I have a particular sound in mind, so make sure you click on All Assets, and in the search line, I'm going to type Scorpion Eject. And what we're looking for is a vehicle scorpion eject ready beep. Now we want the sound. So notice just the blue sound icon and not the cyan sound cue icon. So make sure you have this guy selected. Close out the content browser, jump back into Kismet, click on your play announcement, expand its announcement category again, and then right here next to announcement sound, click the green arrow for use selected object in content browser, and there you go. Now it's going to play that sound. Now if you want to sample that sound, we'll jump back into the content browser real quick. I'll just double click it for you. You see it's just a kind of a nice beepy noise to let the player know that some electronic thing just happened. Alright, now back here in Kismet, which I had minimized in the lower corner of the screen, we also want some text. So let's start off by saying let's just keep it simple. This will not turn off the lights, or turn on the lights, excuse me. This could say anything you want. You can type anything you like in here. Now, all we're going to do is take our used output and plug that right into our play announcement. Let's close out Kismet and give this a try. So we'll click play from here, run upstairs, and hit use. This will not turn on the lights, and we get a little beep. I mean, you could just leave it at that if you wanted to. That's, a little annoying, but kind of funny in its own way. So that's going to be the first part of our network. Now, obviously, I need to rebuild my lighting as we just saw the message there. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and stop the video here, go ahead and save your level, and when we get back, I will have rebuilt lights, and we'll go on and take a look and see how we can make this switch say different things as the player continues to press the button. Okay, so we have our first announcement popping up in the view. The next thing I want to do is set up a system where we can have several different announcements take place as the player keeps pressing the button over here on the wall. So I'm going to jump back over here into Kismet. Let's go ahead and disconnect our play announcement. I'll just hold down the Alt key and click on the input for our play announcement, and we'll slide this guy out of the way. Now let's come up with a few different things that our little announcement system could say. So I'm going to grab our little node we have here, hold down Control, hit C, and then V, so that I just copied and pasted. And then I'll paste in, let's say, just a few more copies. So I have 5 total. All right, so the first one basically says that this will not turn on the lights. And then let's do the next one. Let's say, please leave this switch alone. And then the next one will say, the light switch is behind you by the door. And let's do the next one. Let's say, I'm warning you. I love that. Reminds me of Tron. I'm such a geek. Okay, now let's grab play announcement, and the last one will be, okay, comma, have it your way. And we'll just put an ellipse at the end of that. Okay, so we have these 5 things that we want to cycle through. But the question becomes, how do we cycle through them? Well, previously, we used a switch to toggle between the on and off states of our material, and we can also use a switch to cycle through all of these different announcements. So I'm going to right-click, go to New Action, and choose a switch. And we'll just choose a regular switch. Now, obviously, we do not have enough links, so go ahead and take your link count and set that from 1 up to 5. And now we can just plug each one of these in. So link 1 goes to our first announcement, and so on all the way down. And the nature of this switch is such that the first time we get an input, it'll send a signal out to link 1, then link 2, then link 3, then 4, then 5. So we get everybody played back one after the other. Now I'm going to drag out from the used into this switch, and our switching system is now in place. Let's give this just a quick test. And I didn't rebuild lighting before I started this video. But you'll notice now, as I keep pressing the E key, we're getting different messages. Now here's a problem. There's just one little quick thing we could fix. if the player were to run up to this switch and just hammer the E key, watch what happens. You get a whole bunch of annoying repetitive sounds, the images kind of, or I'm sorry, the messages kind of stack up in the queue and you don't even get to read them all. So just in case somebody wanted to just go up and just flick the daylight out of that switch, it would be nice if we could force the player to have to slow down a bit. And the way we're going to do that is by putting a retrigger delay on our actual trigger event. So if we select the event and scroll way down in its properties, at the bottom you'll see a retrigger delay currently set to 0. That means you can use this trigger as fast as you can press the E key. We're going to pull that back to a 3-second delay. That means the first time that this trigger is used, the trigger then immediately becomes useless for the next 3 seconds. After that, you can use it again, and then it's useless for another 3 seconds. So let's try this. Let's go ahead and close out. Right-click and play from here. Now, I can spam the E key as fast as I want, and it doesn't matter. We've got to wait 3 seconds. So that means that the player is going to see that message pop up in the view. Alright, so that takes care of switching through multiple messages. There's one more thing I want to do, though. We've got the "okay, have it your way" message. Let's add a message to this. Let's say right after that's said, the next thing we want is for another one to pop up where the system says, "but don't say we didn't warn you." So I'm going to take our little play announcement and copy-paste it again. Place this just beneath, and let's go ahead and change the text. So I'll continue with our little ellipse and say, "but don't say we didn't warn you," exclamation point at the end of that. Now I'm just going to take the output of my play announcement and plug that into the new play announcement. But there's a problem with doing this, and I'd like to go ahead and demonstrate. So let's jump in real quick, and we'll just wait through this one. So there's our first message, second message, third message. We're giving plenty of time for these to fade out, which is nice. Now watch this. See, they both come in at the same time, and the two sound effects kind of stack up one after the other, which is no good. We need some sort of a delay in between those two announcements. To add that, we could add a delay sequence object. There actually is a sequence object specifically for that, but because we're going to be using a static and unchanging delay, what I'm going to do instead is take the output of our play announcement, right-click on it, and from the menu that pops up, you can choose Set Activate Delay. This is kind of like an inline delay. It doesn't require a node of its very own. This can be put on any output or input, and it can be very useful. So let's set this to 2 seconds. So now we're going to delay the output to this next announcement by 2 seconds. And just to kind of speed the process up, what I'm going to do is come back over to my trigger and temporarily we'll set the retrigger delay back down to 0, just for testing purposes. Now let's come back up to our little switch. So this is just so I can kind of fast forward through this. So we're to the last one when we use this, and then we wait 2 seconds, and it fires off the next one, which is perfect. All right, now there's only one last thing I want to add, which is going to be an announcement that the self-destruct sequence has been initiated. So I'll take my play announcement, we'll copy that off one more time, just like we did before, connect this back in, and let's just type into our announcement text, self-destruct sequence initiated. Now, we'll take the output of this, and we're actually going to delay this by 3 seconds. So let's right-click, go to Set Activate Delay, 3 seconds. You know what? It's bugging me. We're going to reverse that. I'm going to take my initial delay, and we'll set that one to 3 seconds. And this one I'm only going to set to 2 seconds. So we'll give this one final test to kind of get all the timing down, because you can adjust this to whatever timing you prefer. So we'll fast forward to the end. Now, here's what we get. Have it your way, but don't say we didn't warn you. Self-destruct sequence. Okay, that's perfect. That's what I'm going to go with. So now the last thing I'm going to do, just to kind of clean my mess up, is take my retrigger delay, set that back up to 3, and that will wrap it up for this portion of our Kismet sequence. So go ahead and save your level, and then we'll continue in the next level. And this time I really will build lighting before the next. All right, so our system at this point tells the player that they're in trouble. Now, three things need to happen. We need to switch on an alarm, we need to lock the door, and we need to start a 10-second countdown. Now, the alarm is very easy. Locking the door is maybe just a tiny little bit more difficult. And then the countdown is really just more of a setup issue than it is anything that's particularly hard to do. So we're just going to pick on playing back our sound, which is extremely easy, though it does require an asset that I created from one of the existing assets here inside of Unreal. So let me go ahead and switch to all assets, and what I want you to do is search for alarm. Now by default with UDK, you're going to get a gameplay CTF flag alarm queue, and if you play this back, it's just a little 4-beep alarm to let you know that somebody has taken the enemy flag. Now all I did was I right-clicked on this and created a copy, and then we went into the package, I gave it a custom package name, and I called it just alarm queue. And then you can take the copy, right-click on it, and choose Edit using Sound Queue Editor, and it has this looping node. If you like, you can just take loop indefinitely and set this to on, and then, as the name suggests, the thing's just going to go on forever. So here we have the alarm queue, which is the same sound, it just never stops beeping. So that's all I've done here. So let's stop that. I'm just going to right-click and choose Stop Sound. Okay, so let's close out the content browser. Now I still have that alarm queue selected. Please keep that in mind. Let's open up Unreal Kismet. I'm going to right-click, go to New Action, choose Sound, and we'll choose Play Sound. All we're going to do is take the play announcement for our self-destruct sequence initiated, take the output, and plug that into play on our Play Sound. Now, on our sound sequence object, we'll come down to the Play Sound property, and I'm just going to click the Use Selected Object in Content Browser button, which uses the exact guy that we needed to. So that's it. We're technically done at this point. I'm not going to spatialize or give a target to the audio because really I want this to sound like it's coming from everywhere. So let's give this just a real quick test. Actually, let's make sure we're kind of in debug mode. I'm going to just leave our re-trigger delay back to 0 for now because that's faster and easier. And let's play from here. And I died because I spawned halfway through. And, you know, I still didn't rebuild the lighting. Isn't that just terrible of me? It's too bad it doesn't matter for the Kismet demo. So let's fast forward to the end of our sequence. Okay, have it your way. And then we get Don't Say We Didn't Warn You. And now we have an alarm. And this alarm will never switch off. So there we go. Now, I have been terrible up to this point. I've said repeatedly that I'm going to rebuild my lighting, and then I inevitably find something like a cup of coffee or a piece of pizza or something, and I totally forget about it. So go ahead and save your level, and then from here, we're going to go on and take a look at how we can lock the door, which is actually a pretty cool system, which we will look at in the next video, where this time, third time's a charm, the lighting will be rebuilt when we get back. Okay, our next step is going to be to lock the door, and for the purposes of demonstration, I'm going to show you two ways to do this. The first way is a little bit more of a difficult way. There's a few more things involved in it, and will generally not be the way you go, but it does allow me to show you some cool tricks within Kismet and some logical operations that can help you out later on down the road. Now, once we're done with that, I'll come back and show you how you can replace everything we set up with really just a single node that does the job for you. But in this video, what we're going to do is set up the hard way, so to speak, and it's really not that hard, but it's harder. So let's jump into Kismet. And if we take a look right now, the player's using the trigger, they're getting all these announcements, then they get a warning, and then finally the alarm plays. The moment we actually make it to this point, when the alarm has played, I would like the door to lock. As a matter of fact, it would be nice if we locked it beforehand, so that if the player got wise and realized they were in trouble, they don't have this little extra 5 seconds to try to get out of the room. We want to seal them in pretty quickly. So what I'm going to do is, well, let's just start this way. Let's talk about what would cause the door to seem locked. Because if we right-click and go to Action, it's not like we have a door lock submenu in here. But if we take a look at the door itself, we've got a trigger, and it has some functionality. We have a wire that's playing our matinee, that opens the door, and another wire that's reversing it, and that closes the door. If we could intercept these wires and basically tell them, hey, the door's locked, do not send this signal, we would have thereby locked the door in terms of what the player would experience. So here's how we're going to do this. Let me take our door network. I'm going to expand it out. And let's hold down Control and Alt. Let me grab my matinee and the two little nodes connected to it, and we'll stretch those out to create some room. I am going to right-click and create a new condition. And for a condition, we're going to grab a comparison, and I'm going to grab a compare bool. Now, a compare bool, really all it's going to do is check the value of a Boolean variable. If you're unfamiliar with Boolean variables, they're just a value that's either true or false, 1 or 0. They're binary. So we'll choose compare bool, and to help make this really clear what we're doing, I'm going to put in an object comment. We'll say, is the door locked? Now, here's how this is going to work. We're going to plug a Boolean variable into this compare bool. It's going to check and see what the value of it is. If the value is true, we get an output from here. If it's false, we get an output from here. That's how this works. So let's go ahead and take touched, and we'll plug this in. Now, if the door is locked, we don't want anything to happen. If it's not locked, then we want to play our matinee. It really is that easy. So I'm going to hold down Alt and click on the middle of that wire, and we'll take out that extra wire, which is pretty handy that you can do that. Now, all we need is some sort of a variable to control when the door becomes locked. So we'll start off right here with our little bool input. I'm going to right-click and choose Create New Bool Variable. By default, this is set to a value of false. So currently, the door is not locked, meaning if we jump in and test things, the door works just fine. It does exactly what it's supposed to. So now if we jump into Kismet and we set this to a value of true, which means just come into your B value and set this to 1. Now I will give you just a little bit of a heads up. The way in which you change Boolean values does have a tendency to change slightly from node to node. On certain sequence objects, you can set between 1 and 0. On others, there's a checkbox that can be on or off, but it all means the same thing. I just want to kind of give a heads up. You'll see that actually here in just a moment, but now you will have heard about it beforehand. So now I've set this to true. Let's choose play from here again. And now the gate doesn't work. Well, we've effectively locked the gate. Now, just to be completely on the safe side, so that maybe the player doesn't run up and get the thing locked out before the gate has time to close, which is really unlikely, but just as an extra security measure, I'm going to take our little compare bool and hit Control-C, Control-V, and make a duplicate of it. Let's hold down Alt and unconnect it from false, and I'm going to take out our untouched wire by Alt-clicking on it. Let's put both of these in here. And then what we're going to do is say when we untouch, we're also going to check and see that the door is locked. And if it's not locked, we're going to play backwards. So basically, the door is going to check in both directions to see if it's locked. And if it's locked, it's not going to do anything. Okay, now that second part, you could probably argue that it's unnecessary. I'm just kind of throwing it in more as an example than for anything else. Now here's our problem though, and here's where this gets to be kind of interesting. We now have two separate variables that would need to be switched. What we can do is take either one of them and delete it, and we can take our input, and now we can connect them both to the exact same variable. So now we can set this back to false, 0, and now our doors will work again. Okay, that's great. We have a variable which will effectively lock out our doors so it'll quit operating. But how do we change that? How do we take this variable which controls our door lock status and update it? Well, I'm glad you asked. If you asked, I'm going to right-click over here next to our little announcement list, go to New Action, and there's a Set Variable subgroup. We're going to choose bool. This allows us to set a Boolean value. Now I'm going to play this right off of the announcement where we say, okay, have it your way. So right as they hit the switch that fifth and final time, we're going to immediately lock the door. Now, let's take a look at this sequence object. It asks for a default value. This time, notice it's a checkbox and not a 1 or 0. It's a different way to make the input, but it means the exact same thing. 0 equals false equals unchecked. So unchecked is false. Our default value in this case, though, is going to be true because we want to lock the door. Remember, our little Boolean comparison up here is asking, is the door locked, true or false? We want to set that to true. Now, we need to give this a target. That's the little, notice that you have a triangle here on the bottom. This is the first time we've seen this thus far. Up to now, all we've had is little squares hanging out the bottom of our sequence objects. A square is an input, meaning it's going to be receiving some sort of data. A triangle is an output, meaning it's going to send out some sort of data. We're going to take the target and plug that over here into our little variable. So now that, as soon as this node fires, as soon as we get our little set Boolean, in fact, let's give this an object comment. I'll select it and choose lock the door, like so. And that's going to set that to true, which means the door is locked. So the next time we try to use the door, it should not work. Let's give it a quick test. All right, so currently testing, door's working great, looks fine. All right, now we come over here, and I'll just kind of fast forward to the end. And already the door is locked. So nothing is working anymore. That's exactly what we want to see. Okay, so that's in place. Now, currently, I would say that this big, long red wire that's reaching all the way across our Kismet view is a little bit on the unsightly side. So what we're going to do is save everything right now. We're going to stop this video, and in the next video, I'll show you a way to set this exact same system up in kind of a wireless fashion, so that you don't have to have this great big long connected wire which reaches across several different sequence objects. So that will wrap things up for this video. Thanks. All right, we're back, and as I mentioned in the last video, I'm going to show you a way that you can connect these variables together without having these really long, unsightly lines which reach across all your sequence objects. Now, if you don't mind those lines, in fact, if you feel better knowing that they're there, by all means, leave them. You don't have to take them out. This is something that I just thought I'd throw in because it's kind of cool. What we're going to use is a named variable. A named variable is kind of like a radio control variable. You give it a specific name, which is kind of like a radio channel, and it's just going to listen out for signals to come in on that channel, and it'll update accordingly. Here's how they work. First off, we need to designate kind of our base variable. He's going to be the guy that will actually change and store the data. So I'm just going to right-click out here in empty space, create a new variable, and since it's a Boolean value, true or false, we'll just create a basic Boolean variable. Now, notice every single variable you create has a var name property. So we're going to call this door lock with a little bit of capitalization to make it look interesting. And because I don't want to lose this guy, because he's just a tiny little variable, and as things got more and more complex, we might forget he was there, I'm going to select it, press C to create a new comment, and we'll call this named variables. And I'll make the box nice and big, like so. So that way, we've got a nice, obvious area where any named variables will go. Okay, so this guy's going to store the data, but how do we get data over to him without any wires? This is where creating the actual named variable type comes in. What I'm going to do is come over here to this guy. Let's right-click, come down to New Variable, and you'll actually see Named Variable. And by default, when you first bring it in, it's got a red X and some question marks in it. This is kind of like a radio which hasn't been set to a specific channel. Setting it to its channel requires that we select the variable, go into its find var name property, and we're going to set this to door lock. Now notice I typed it in all lowercase. When I press enter, notice that the capitalization updates, and now instead of a red X, we get a little green check mark to say, hey, I found the variable that you want to talk to. A signal has been established. So we're set to go. Now, all I'm going to do is disconnect this wire leading out of the target, and we're going to plug into our little door lock named variable. What's happening now is that when our little set Boolean sequence object gets a signal, it's going to transmit that signal down to the door lock named variable, which will in turn talk to our door lock variable hidden way over here without any wires connected to it. Now, all I'm going to do is take this guy who's controlling our door locks. I'm going to delete him out. And just for simplicity's sake, let's grab our existing name variable. I'll hit Control C, fly back over here to these guys and hit Control V. Now, we technically only need one of these, and we could create wires in between the two. You know, since we're already trying to make things nice and wireless at this point, we could just paste in a second copy. It's perfectly fine to do that. And now they're both listening out for changes to the door lock variable. We've got the exact same thing we had a second ago, except now it's wireless. Let's go ahead and try it out. Okay, fast forward to the end, and already the door doesn't work. Now, it occurs to me that I didn't test the door to begin with, which is kind of bad form. So notice door's working, opening and closing. Now I'm going to come up here, fast forward through all these guys, and now the door, oh, it still works. And actually that time it got locked open, so let's take a quick look at that. That's kind of funny. So it's almost like I found a little debugging flaw. What we're doing is we're locking the door after a 3-second delay, so it's still possible that the player could lock the door open, and we don't want that to happen. So I'm going to disconnect that guy. Let's grab our lock the door sequence along with his little named variable, and I'm going to pull it over so that right after we hit the button for the 5th time, the door immediately locks. We'll try out one more time. So right now, door works great. Next. And if we try it again, door doesn't work. We can't get out. Excellent. So I've just shown you how this can be handled in kind of a wireless form. Now, one of the reasons that this is also kind of an important technique, the ability to have named variables. Now, I don't want to get too far ahead of myself, and I could really easily. But what I'm going to do real quick is I'm going to select my door network. So let's hold down Control and Alt, and I'll just grab everybody here. I could, if I wanted to, right-click and create a new sequence out of these guys, and this is going to create a subsequence. So let's call this door system or door network. You can still call it door network if you wanted to, just without a space. Click OK, and now all of that entire network has been crushed down to a single sequence object. I can double-click on this subsequence, and there's all the nodes within it. So now if you remember way back to the beginning, we had this open parent sequence button up in the upper left corner. This allows me to step back up. Now the cool thing about that is that since we've set up this kind of wireless approach to our door system, our connections are still intact. We don't need to worry about any wires leading into or out of anybody. So everything will still work even though we've crushed this down to a single subsequence. So let's give this one more try. Everything is working. And now we try it, and the door doesn't work. Now, I'm not going to go too far into subsequences beyond that. However, I will kind of undo this by grabbing all of these sequence objects within my subsequence. So just as a recap, I just grabbed my little sequence object I created, double-clicked it, hold down Control and Alt. Let's grab everybody. I'm going to hit Control X this time to cut, jump back up to the parent sequence, hit delete, and yes, I want to delete the selected sequence, and then hit Control V, and that'll paste everybody right back in. So it's kind of a way to undo all of that collapsing that I just did a second ago. So now you've seen named variables. You've actually kind of incidentally seen subsequences as well, but we're going to take a look at using subsequences in a bit more depth a little later on. That's going to wrap things up for this video. Now from here out, I'm going to show you how to take this entire system that we did here with our little wireless nodes and how to take all this out. There will be no more named variables. We're going to do it all with a single sequence object. So all of that coming up. Okay, so you've seen one way to lock these doors. Now let's take a look at another way, which is actually quite a bit easier. I just wanted to make sure you got to see how named variables work, and it is kind of a cool setup. But let's jump back into Kismet, and what I'm going to do is grab all of these compare bools, asking if the door is locked. We're just going to nuke those. We'll connect our untouched and our touch right back into where they were. I'm going to take my whole named variable section out, and then over here, I'm going to take lock the door and remove that as well. Now what I'm going to replace it with is just a regular toggle. In fact, the exact same kind of sequence object that we used over here to switch our light on and off. Just right click, go to new action, choose toggle, and bring in our toggle. Now you might have noticed this has an event input on it. Now the purpose of this input is to allow you to activate or deactivate any Kismet event that you like. So what I'm going to do is drag our event input all the way back over here to our trigger touch for the door. And then we'll just take link 5 and connect that to turn off. It really is that easy. Let's give it a quick test. So we right click, choose play from here. Now, door is opening and closing. Everything's working great. We come over here, jump all the way through, and door suddenly does not work. So it's working just as well as our previous system did. And it's really only a single node. However, you might be thinking to yourself, wait, does this mean I have to go back to using wires? What if I like the wireless system? Don't worry, if I left it here, the video would have been really short anyway. So let me show you how you can take this and make it a wireless system. This requires that we use remote events, which are kind of like the event equivalent to named variables. I'm going to take our toggle and disconnect it from link 5, and I'm going to hold down Control and drag it right over here and put it right above our event, like so. And let's give it an object comment. This will be our door lock toggle. And let me put spaces in there to make it easier to read. I type a lot like that when I'm doing notes or coding something. And I'm going to slide everything over to give a little bit more room, because here's the thing. We need some way to activate this turn off input. We need something to plug into this guy. We currently don't have anything. This is where remote events come into play. A remote event is, as I mentioned earlier, just like a named variable. You can give the remote event a name, and then you can activate and deactivate that event by calling out its name. So let's start off just by setting up the remote event itself. I'm going to come over here to our door lock toggle, right click, choose new event, and we're just going to create a remote event. Now, by default, a remote event doesn't really do anything. It's not like a use trigger. It doesn't have any particular special outputs. All it has is one generic output. So really, it's just like a simple radio switch that is going to send out an electronic pulse when you send a signal its way. That's all it does. But there's some info we got to plug in. First off, we're going to come under its properties. We're going to scroll down. Its max trigger count is actually 0 by default, which I find amazingly useful. We need to give this an event name, and we're going to call this lock door. So when lock door is called, notice as soon as we do that, we see that event lock door fires up, and we're going to plug that into to turn off, which will switch off our event. Problem here is that currently nothing is ever calling lock door. Nothing is making this event actually fire off and lock our door up. So I'm going to come back over here to our link 5 area, right click, choose new action, and down from here you'll see an event submenu. Choose activate remote event. Now really all this guy's doing is he's going to send a signal out to any like-named remote event. So we need to grab our event name property here inside the activate remote events properties, and we'll set this to all lowercase just for the fun of it, lock door. It finds the name, we get a little green checkbox. Now over here we still have a little red checkbox. Let's go ahead and plug this into link 5. Also, I'm going to close Kismet and reopen Kismet. And now we have a nice green checkbox here on our remote event as well. So link 5 is causing our remote event to get activated. We now have a wireless connection, but we should test it out. So we'll jump here and run up, and let's see, door's working great. I love it. Now let's come over here, and I'll just spam through these real fast. We'll try the door again, and and now the door doesn't work. So everything is working exactly like it did back when we still had 5 different nodes all connected, when we had wires reaching everywhere, except that now things are a lot cleaner. They're wireless, and I'll just kind of go through it a little more slowly real quick. I'm just going to walk up to it now, and nothing. So boom. The exact same kind of behavior that we had before, where we can now selectively lock the door just with fewer nodes. Now really, the first system we used with named variables wasn't necessarily bad. I just wanted to make sure that you guys got to see how that worked. It's just another way to go about it. Visual scripting is very much like scripting in the real world, and everybody's going to have a different style. So try to keep that in mind and keep all of your tools at hand. So go ahead and save your level at this point, and we will move on from here. Thanks a lot. Okay, so our alarm is going off, the door gets locked. The next thing we need is our 10-second countdown timer. Now, the way we're going to handle this is going to be kind of similar to how we've been playing sound so far. We're going to use the play announcement sequence object. So let's jump into Kismet real quick. And let me grab a new play announcement. I'm just going to right-click, choose New Action, Voice Announcements, click Play Announcement. And this first one, I'm going to expand, take the announcement text and set it to 10, and the object comment also set to 10 as well. Now we need to plug a sound in here. Cool thing is UDK automatically comes with a nice countdown for the end of a match. So come into your content browser, click All Assets, and in your search line, type in countdown, and you'll go right to these. And if I just kind of cycle through them all real quick to give you a quick playback.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10.
There you go. There's all 10 of them. So if we play back through those backwards, of course, we're going to get a 10-second countdown. But there's a few things we need to keep in mind. One is how we can control how the countdown takes place. It's like, if you ever watched, the first example that comes to mind is a space shuttle launch. They don't necessarily count down in seconds to liftoff, and it's kind of a slower countdown. So you could do that as well. It doesn't necessarily have to be 1 second, and controlling timing here is going to be a critical factor. But first, let's get just a very simple countdown in place. So I'm going to open Kismet back up. Let's go into Play Announcement. Now currently, I believe I still have sound effect 10 selected, so I can go into my announcement sound and just click Use Sound in Content Browser, and there it is, plugged right in. Now, I'm going to duplicate this off 9 more times to get my remaining sounds. So with this guy selected here in Kismet, we'll hit Control-C, then Control-V. And then I'm just going to hit Control-V for, there was 9, then 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Now position all these out like so. And there we go. Now, I need to get them all associated with the proper sound effect and change their comments. Now, the cool thing is all of those sound effects are named the same thing with just different numbers at the end. All you have to remember is that it's a 2-digit number. So we can take countdown 09 for the next one, but then I'm going to hit the down arrow key and set announcement text and object comment to 9 as well. So if you want, you can cycle through and do these on your own, or if you find yourself wanting to, track forward on the video, I can't say that I would blame you. I'll do 07 and 7 and 7. And then 06 and 6 and 6. 05 and then 5 and 5. Boring, isn't it? 04. Actually, whoop, I hit the down arrow key. Look what I just did. That's terrible. So I gotta grab this guy again. I hit the down arrow key instead of hitting 0, which wiped out my input. So we'll set that to 4. And then this is 4, and this is 4 as well. So I guess that's a good point that you could watch out, make sure you don't do the same thing. 3, 2, and finally 1. All right, so we have now set up Our countdown goes all the way from 10 down to 1. Now, how do we play these back? Well, the immediate answer may be to just plug this guy in here, and we'll certainly get 10, but how do we get the rest? Well, we could wire them in series. We could say, all right, let's do 10 to 9, 9 to 8, 8 to 7, and so on. We could just connect all these together. And I missed one. There we go. You can plug from an input back to an output if you like. It doesn't matter. All right. So now let's give this a quick try. So we'll jump in. Now everything's still kind of in fast forward mode. There's no delay on the trigger, so I'm just going to spam through this real fast. We get our little warning.
10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
So she's counting down, but the actual visual cue just flew by really, really fast. There was no delay there whatsoever. And then the rate at which she spoke each number was dictated by how long it took her to say that number, which means you don't have a constant countdown. If it's quicker for her to say 2 than it is to say 7, then the next numbers in sequence are going to come along much more quickly. We need to keep everything nice and regular for a good countdown. So you're probably thinking, well, you know, we used these activate delays earlier. Can't we just right-click on the output of each one of these and set an activate delay of, say, a second? Sure you can. But now let's put yourself in a situation where your level designer comes in and says, hey, that's great, I really like that, but you know, I'm thinking that the delay needs to be a little slower, so can we pull that down to, you know, maybe a second and a half? And so you're like, okay, fine. So you go over and you take all your activate delays, you set them to a second and a half, only to find that they come back and say, no, that's too long. Let's try 1.25 seconds. And so you go change them all again, and you can see where that would waste a lot of time and just be a pain to have to go back and edit. What we're going to do instead is make use of a special type of switch called a delayed switch. So let's take just a moment and kill off all these wires just by alt-clicking on each one down the list. We'll even alt-click this wire. I'm going to right-click, come to New Action, down to Switch, and grab a delayed switch. Now what a delayed switch is going to do is it's going to receive a single signal, and then it's just going to cycle down through each thing that's connected to it, one thing at a time, pausing for a set amount of time. So it'll fire off link 1, and then the next link, and then the next link, and the next link. Each time it'll wait for a specified delay time. Now if we select it, we've got a few properties we need to keep in mind. The first is the link count, which by default is set to 1. We're going to crank this not up to 10, but actually up to 11. 11 is going to be kind of our 0 index. So, you know, you count down from 10, you get all the way down to 1, and then nothing actually happens at 1. It's not like, you know, the space shuttle launches at 1. It's not like the bomb goes off at 1. It all goes off at 0. So you get 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and then an explosion. And that's why we're going to set an 11th link here. Also, notice you have a link labeled aborted. For our purposes, just pretend in your mind that that's link 2. It'll make things a lot easier. Now, let's take our play announcement. We'll plug this to the input of the delayed. And we need to specify what the amount of delay is going to be. Now, there's no property for that. In order to make that happen, we need to right-click on our delay input, create a new float variable, and I'm just going to set that to 1 second. The cool thing about this is that now our delay time is localized. We don't have to go change it on a whole bunch of different input or activate delays. We can change it in one location, and it'll affect everything. Now we need to get everything connected up. I'm going to hit Control and Alt. I'm going to drag a marquee selection box around all my announcement nodes and slide them over a little bit. And let's just connect, and connect, and connect. I'd call out what was going where, but it gets kind of confusing because it's link 1 goes to 10, aborted goes to 9, 3 goes to 8, 4 goes to 7, 5 goes to 6. It's just, you can see how they connect. It's pretty linear. And last one. And did I miss somebody? 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And we have link 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. Oh, I missed link 7. It was right there in front of me, and I just didn't see it. I'd be embarrassed if there weren't so many links to stare at. For a second there, for just a second, you actually got to listen to me thinking I was going crazy. So this is what you should have, is a little spare 11th link that's not doing anything. All right, now we need to try this out. So let's close out of Kismet, jump into our level. And once again, we're still in test mode, so I'm just going to zip through our initial stuff.
Ten, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Excellent. So we're getting a nice regular countdown, and if at any point we feel we want to change the playback, we can take that float value, set it up to maybe 1.5 seconds, and let's just try that out again. All right, let's see how she counts this time.
10, 9, 8, 7.
And you can see how that works. So if you want to build up a little more tension and slow down the countdown, you can certainly do that, and it's really easy to do now. So we have our countdown system in place. Everything that needs to happen once the player hits their switch for the final time is technically in order. Now all we need to do is, at the end of the countdown, we need to blow up the player, and then as soon as that's done, we're going to switch off our alarm system. So we'll take a look at doing that in the next video. For now, go ahead and save your level, and that will wrap everything up here. Thanks. Alright, so at this point, all the hard stuff is over. We've got our switch, which is locking the door, firing off an alarm, counting down. We just need to blow the player up, which is very, very easy. We're going to jump back into Kismet, and here's our little open 11th link. I'm going to right-click, go to New Action. Let's come over to Actor, and we have Modify Health. Let's go ahead and select that, and we'll go ahead and plug this into link 11. Now, Modify Health needs some information from us. First off, how much are we going to modify the health? Now, if you don't change anything, if you just plug in a number here, it's assuming that you are trying to hurt the player. So the default is to injure the player or take away health. If you want to add health for some reason, you can switch this over to heal by activating the heal checkbox. Now, what I'm going to do is set this to amount 500, which is 5 times the amount it takes to kill something. And we're going to take our damage type and set this to Scorpion Self-Destruct. So it's actually going to blow up. There'll be bits of robot everywhere. It's going to be fantastic. Now, we need to give this guy a target. Whose health is he modifying? The answer is the player. So I'm going to right-click, come down to New Variable, choose Player, and hit Player. Now, you can leave this set to all players. I'm actually going to switch off the all players checkbox. So that'll be Player 0, since this is just kind of a one-player thing anyway. And there we go. So we're already hurting the player. That's done. However, that itself is going to be a little bit on the anticlimactic side. I also want to play a sound effect. So I'm going to right-click, go to New Action, jump down to Sound, and choose Apply Sound. Not Apply Sound, no, excuse me. I wanted to play a sound. So just grab Play Sound, like so. Now we need to feed this some sound for the content browser. So I'm going to close out Kismet, open up the content browser, and I want you to just search for explosion. And one of the first things you'll see up near the top is A Weapon SR Combo Explosion Q. This is what happens when you're fortunate enough or skilled enough, I guess, to be able to hit a shock rifle combo, which means you fire out the little shock ball and then you shoot it with your shock rifle, and you get this grand explosion. But here's what it sounds like. It's just a great sound. I even like the little electrical sparks at the end, which is perfect if you're blowing up a robot. So with that selected, let's close out the content browser, jump back into Kismet, select our play sound, and there's a play sound property here that's looking for a sound cue. We'll just click the use current selection in the content browser. Now I'm going to scroll down to the bottom here. I'm going to take our volume multiplier and set it up to 2 to make this pretty loud. And then I'm also going to run this in tandem from link 11. So link 11 will kill the player and play this at the same time. Now that should be it. Let's go ahead and give this a quick test. So we run up, just fast forward through it to give it a quick test. Alright. Alarm.
10,
Countdown.
9,
The door's locked.
8,
I still
7,
have everything set to a second and a half, so it's really slow.
5,
So we can sit here and relish
4,
our upcoming demise.
3, 2,
Alright, put your fingers in your
1.
ears, folks. And there we go. We blow apart, we get our sound effects, and everything is good to go. So that pretty much does it for what we're going to put together. So at this point, go ahead and save your level, and there's just one or two more things that I want to talk about involving Kismet, and then this whole section will be wrapped up. So I'll see you in just a moment. Okay, so the last thing I want to talk to you about in this Kismet demonstration is how to organize your Kismet sequences into a list of subsequences that you can step down into, which can be really useful if you have a lot of different things going on inside of Kismet. Now, incidentally, you've already seen this a little bit as we were going through the videos, but here's what we've got. Now, in between recordings, between the end of the last video and the start of this one, I did take just a moment and put a comment box around our explosion switch, but you've already seen how to do that. Now, we have these 4 individual sections. They all relate to one another, or at least some of them do, but they're not actually connected. They're all independent, and what I want to do is collapse all of them down into their own subsequence, and then we'll talk about how we can navigate between those. So I'm going to start off with our initial conditions. I'll select everything, including the comment box, right-click and choose Create New Sequence, and we'll call this level. Actually, let's call it the same thing, just without spaces. We'll use underscores instead. Initial underscore level underscore conditions. And we get a single sequence object that contains all of that information. Now, before I do anything else, let's go ahead and set the same thing up for all of our remaining node networks. So we'll grab our light switch network, right-click, and create a new sequence, and we'll call this light underscore switch. We don't really need network in there. And I'm going to drag this over here next to my first subsequence. Let's grab the next one, right-click, create new sequence, and we'll call this the door. And we'll drag this nearby as well. And then finally, let's grab the explosion switch, and we'll grab everybody, right-click, new subsequence, or new sequence, excuse me, and we'll call this explosion switch. Now, obviously, you can see where this is kind of nice just in terms of organization. Things are crushed down, so if we had a ton of Kismet in here, we can keep things very tight and manageable. It's easy to see what each thing does, and you can double-click on any one of these subsequence nodes and affect each one of those nodes. You can go in and edit them. When you're done, up here in the upper left-hand corner of the interface, you can click on Open Parent Sequence, and that'll jump you back out. But this also allows me to talk about the Sequences panel. Currently, at the topmost level, you'll see that our Kismet demo level has only 4 sequences in it. I can now expand that, and here are all of my other subsequences, and you can see how many nodes are in each one. And we can actually navigate between each of these subsequences just by clicking inside this panel. So if I want to jump down inside my explosion switch, just click on it and we jump down inside. If I want to go inside the light switch, same thing. So it's a very fast and easy way to navigate through the various nodes. And if we hadn't done this, if we hadn't set up all of these subsequences, all of these folders you see here in the sequences panel wouldn't exist. All we'd see is Kismet Demo 04, sequence, and then whatever the total number of nodes happen to be. So now we can actually very quickly, by name, without even having to look around and find where things are placed, we can jump into an individual section and just have a tightly focused view of the nodes that we need to edit. So it's a very nice way to stay on top of exactly what it is you want to work on, you want to change. Now, that will wrap things up for this Kismet demo. I think the only thing I'd like to say in closing is that I highly encourage you to just get in here and start playing with Kismet. You're not really going to break anything, and you just might find that you've come up with some really cool kind of level script, or even defined your very own game just using Kismet nodes. So get in here, have fun, learn what these actions and events can do, and that will wrap things up for this video. Thanks a lot. Let's take a look at how to create a mover. Now, mover is just a simple kind of interp actor that's already got some matinee setup already built into it. It's very nice if you need to create a simple lift to get a player up to another story, Or maybe when they step on it, it doesn't necessarily have to move up and down. It could move sideways to take them across a gap. All sorts of ways to use these. They're extremely easy to set up, even easier than a door. And the way we're going to do it is we're going to start off in the content browser, and I'm going to grab SLT Bridge SM Bridge Panel 01E. So it's just a static mesh that you could use for the base of an elevator-like object. Now you can use any mesh you like. This is just the one I'm picking on. Let's right-click. And instead of dragging this in, I'm going to right-click here on the floor and choose Add Actor. And you want to bring this in as a mover. So not an interp actor, but a mover. And we could position this a little bit better. Let me jump over to the top view real quick. And we'll just kind of slide this over so that the side of it kind of gets close to the edge of the balcony way up here. In fact, let me bring down my drag grid. And we'll get it right on the edge. That's really good. Okay, so what we're hoping for is that the player can stand on this and it will simply rise them up and they can now run up here and get the rocket launcher if they want to, as opposed to having to climb some stairs. And we don't want to nudge that like so. But if we take a look over in Kismet, now that we've added this as a mover, some stuff has already been done for us. You see we have interp actor 0 here. If I double click this, we already have an event and a matinee already in place. Now take a look at the outputs of our event. It's a mover event already attached to the interp actor. It has pawn attached and detached. What that means is a player is standing on this object. That's kind of what attached translates directly to, that they are on top of, and if this object moves, the player needs to move along with them. You also have open finished. This is what will fire once the elevator has made it to its actual top height. So it's going to travel up. When it gets to the top, what's it going to do when it gets there? And in this case, you can see that it's going to play the matinee backwards. If it hits the actor, meaning like let's say we ride the elevator to the top, but we jump off it and stand underneath it, if it hits us, it's going to change direction and go back up to the top. So pretty straightforward. However, the matinee sequence has no keyframe data just yet. So I'm going to double click the matinee. Already has a movement track in it, so it's ready to go, but it doesn't have any keyframes. Here with the time slider at 0, I'll go ahead and press enter with the movement track selected. That'll create our first key. And let's just do, let's say a 2-second move, which will feel kind of slow, at least relative to elevators and whatnot that you may see in a game like Unreal Tournament. And we'll press enter again to create our second keyframe. Make sure you see the words adjust key 1 in the lower left corner of the viewport. And we'll just slide this up so it's level or close to it with the edge of our little balcony. Now we can scrub back through that and see the playback. Now I'm going to shorten up our animation so it's only 2 seconds long. So I'll grab the little red flag here on the right and drag that back to 2 seconds. And there we have it. So we have an animation all set up. So now we can close Matinee. Let's jump back into Kismet for just a moment though, and I'll step back into the interp actor. Now, there are just really one property we need to be aware of. The one is stay open time. This is how long our elevator will stay at its top position. Or, if you've actually set up a door like this, this would be how long the door stayed open, etc. So 1.5 seconds is pretty good, though. If you needed to change that, you could. Now, if we were to test this, we would have a problem. Here is our problem. It doesn't seem to work. Now, currently, it's a little hard to tell what the problem is because our mesh is so thin. But if you had a thicker mesh, it'd be painfully obvious. The player is not colliding with our interp actor. So I'm going to select the interp actor and press F4 to open up its properties. Expand collision, and notice that collision type is set to no collision. Set this to collide block all, and you're good to go. So now let's test this out. Choose play from here. And we have a simple lift. It takes us up to the top floor, and now we can get the rocket launcher and everybody's happy. Now also, if we let this go up to the top and now stand underneath it, watch this. It bumps into us and goes right back up, so it's not going to crush us. So that's just a quick look at how to use the mover system as opposed to setting up an interp actor manually, and that is going to wrap things up for this video. Thanks a lot. Kismet.